The UK Constitution is a set of rules which gives power to various public institutions like the government, parliament, the courts, the devolved bodies, local government, determines the way in which they operate, the way in which they interact with each other, and also their relationship with us, the people on whose behalf they govern. In the UK, we have what is known as an uncodified or unwritten constitution. This means that there isn't a single document setting out those key rules, rather they're spread across a number of different places, such as Acts of Parliament, judicial decisions, even treaties, and also what are known as conventions, that are rules or understandings that don't have the full force of law, but nonetheless are very important to the way in which government operates. The Constitution, for all of us, enables us to understand what government should be doing, what government shouldn't be doing, what our relationship is with government, how we can hold it to account, and it enables us to, if we want, try and change government, try and change those rules and ensure that it's working for us. Constitution is important because it's about the way we as a society govern ourselves. It's about the values we think should be upheld, the way in which things should work, and also the way that, if we want to, we can change things. And it's a means of ensuring that people in positions of power behave properly, that we know what they're doing, and that we have ways of holding them to account if we think they're not behaving properly. In recent years, the UK Constitution has been subject to a lot of pressures. In some ways, these things aren't wholly new and they go back a long way, but there have been a lot of doubts and uncertainties developing around the way in which the Constitution operates. For instance, the rules which apply to ministers set out in a document called the Ministerial Code have become rather uncertain, and the way in which they are upheld has become uncertain. To give an example, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister between 2019 and 2022, there were a lot of allegations made that ministers weren't necessarily following the rules in that document, the Ministerial Code. One example being when Priti Patel was Home Secretary, they were accused of bullying staff in the Home Office, which would be a contravention of the Ministerial Code. An official investigation into the alleged bullying found that yes, bullying had taken place, but the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, chose to disagree with that ruling and do nothing about it. Another example of a rule in the Ministerial Code not necessarily being upheld properly is in the idea that ministers are supposed to be truthful in their communications with Parliament and not to mislead Parliament, and that if they knowingly mislead Parliament, they should actually resign, and if they unknowingly mislead Parliament, they should correct that unintentional misleading as soon as possible. There were a variety of allegations about the way in which the Johnson government supposedly misled Parliament, which weren't properly corrected and weren't properly accounted for. So that's an example of the kind of problem that the UK Constitution has been subject to in recent years. Some of the reasons that these uncertainties have built up have included a polarisation in the political system. Arguably, the two main parties at various points have become more extreme over issues such as Brexit, to pick the example of the governing Conservative Party. There was a time when the Conservative Party was actually pro-European integration. Then 30 or 40 years ago, gradual changes took place and became increasingly hostile to the European Union, eventually taking us out of the European Union following the referendum of 2016. That's an example of an area in which a mainstream party has come under arguably more extreme influences, and in the process has started to challenge some of the existing conventions and rules that make up the Constitution. And leaving the European Union, the purpose of which was, for those who advocated it, to take back control, has removed some of the restrictions which previously existed on Parliament and government. Now, some people would say that's a good thing, that Parliament and government shouldn't have been subject to external restrictions, but it does open up possibilities to do things that would have been harder to do before, and could in turn lead to a challenging of values and constitutional principles. If we want to try and restore some stability and certainty to the Constitution, there are already a number of proposals on the table. For instance, recent recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life give an idea of how we can give greater legal authority to rules such as those contained in the Ministerial Code, and also give greater power to those office holders who are responsible for actually upholding these rules. So there are various options on the table, but also if we want to go further than that, one option would be to look at the idea of possibly asking incoming Prime Ministers to swear an oath of office in Parliament, saying that they will abide by the rules and they will seek to uphold constitutional principles. In itself, that might seem like it hasn't got a lot of force, but it could perhaps have an important symbolic value and mean that Prime Ministers have to think carefully about the way in which they go about operating when they're in power. A third option would be more radical change, and to look at the possibility of introducing a written or codified constitution, replacing the unwritten, uncodified constitution, which could perhaps set out the rules more clearly and more formally, and make them subject to some kind of judicial enforcement.